So I've got a few other videos on my channel where I'm comparing different colors of paint or similar colors of paint and seeing how they mix with other colors. And today I'm doing a similar thing, but a little different because I'm looking at white paint. White paint is incredibly important on the artist palette. You pretty much need a white so that you can adjust your values or manipulate your values. If you have been an acrylic artist for any period of time, you've likely used titanium white. That is the most popular type of white for an acrylic artist, but some acrylic artists also use zinc white. And if you're somewhat new, or maybe you haven't experimented with the different whites, you might not really know what the difference is between the two of these and which one is valuable to have on your palette. So titanium white, that's the big one. That's the one almost everyone has on their palette. It's very opaque. You can see Golden has puts the 3 stripes, black stripes, and then does a layer of actual paint over top of it. So you can see its opacity. You can see it's quite opaque. You can barely see the little stripes. Whereas the zinc white, you can see the 3 stripes very easily. Now, titanium white, this is PW6. That's the pigment code. And it is, some artists say it leans a little bit warm, but also other artists say that it's quite neutral. And back in the day, before titanium white became popular, people actually used white lead paint, which is very toxic, and titanium white is considered safe and non-toxic. So that's one of the reasons why it's so popular. Of course, the opacity also allows the acrylic artist to be able to do a lot of layers and cover over mistakes or cover over underlayers, and that's the opacity, so how much you can see the layer below. Now zinc white, this is, like I said before, much less commonly used. It's very transparent and it allows you to glaze over previous layers. It lets the other colors below kind of shine through. And if you're a watercolor artist, now a lot of watercolor artists refuse to use any sort of white paint, but some watercolor artists will use Chinese white, which uses zinc as well. And Golden uses pigment PW4, which is zinc oxide. And some people say it's just, a little bit blue tinged. Still white, but it's a cool white. Okay, let's take a look at the swatch sheet. So on the left, we have titanium white, and on the right, we have zinc white. And if you've seen some of my other videos, I don't usually have the black line, but because we're comparing really the transparency of the two different whites, I added the black line so that we can see just how transparent they are. So if you take a look at titanium white, you can see the single swatch I have up here over the black line. You can see a touch of the black line, but not very much, so it's pretty opaque. And whereas the zinc white, quite transparent. No surprise there. Now, if you compare, so if you look at each half of these sheets, so these are the pure colors, just a little swatch of that. And then I've added a little bit of the white, a little bit more of the white, and then quite a bit more of the white. So it gets increasingly more pastel. And one piece of terminology that is good to know is a color where white has been added is considered a tint. So these are all tints. Okay, so if we compare the two colors, I don't see, or the two shades of white and how they mix with other colors, I don't see a dramatic difference between one being a little bit more warm or a little bit more cool. To me, they're very, very similar. That may depend on the brand of paint, but the two Golden, they seem really, really similar. Of course, where I do notice the difference is the transparency. Again, no surprise. We know that zinc white is very transparent, and you can see it most dramatic in the tints that have the most white in them. If you compare the two vat orange colors, this vat orange, it's just the palest hint of orange. And you can really see so much of the black line underneath, whereas with the titanium white, you can still see some of it. Titanium white, while it's considered opaque, that doesn't mean it literally blocks out everything in a single layer of paint, but it is definitely much more opaque than the zinc white. And you can see that throughout all of the different tints. So if you look, just all of the lightest tints, especially look at the dioxazine purple, You can barely see any there, and you can see the black line, no problem. Now, I didn't do any sort of scientific way of mixing these. I didn't say, okay, well, I'm putting exactly this amount of each of the whites and exactly this amount of each of the colors, but it gives you a good idea. Now, one thing to keep in mind as you're mixing is different pigments have different transparencies. Of course, we see that with the titanium white being quite opaque and the zinc white being quite transparent, but that is also true for some of these different colors. So the two reds, quin magenta, the quinacridone family, considered very transparent, whereas the cadmium families, so this is a cad-free, but it mimics the traditional cadmium reds, cadmiums tend to be quite opaque. And you can see a bit of a difference of that in the mixes that have just a little bit of the titanium white. You can see the black line quite a bit more with the quin magenta versus the cad-free red, which is much more opaque. If you look at the zinc white, even though there's not tons of zinc white, you can already see how it's allowing it to be a bit more transparent here. So just keep that in mind. Just because you add zinc white to a color or titanium white to a color doesn't automatically make it completely transparent or completely opaque. It just kind of leans it or pulls it a little bit more that way. Yellows as a whole, even though cadmiums are considered opaque, yellows as a whole are always a little bit transparent or quite a bit transparent. So even the cadmiums tend to be more transparent compared to like a cadmium red. The cadmium yellow is going to be much more transparent. So you can notice there's not as dramatic of a difference between the titanium white mixes and the zinc white mixes because of that, because you're dealing with two transparencies, kind of two levels of transparency here, whereas one level of transparency and one opacity. It's still going to be pretty transparent. You're not going to see the dramatic difference of how much the titanium white opacity affects it until you get a lot of titanium white into the mix. Now I'm just going to quickly show you just a really quick painting or a pair of paintings that I did using the two different colors. So this top one, titanium white, bottom one, zinc white. Now, I don't love these paintings, but they are quick sketches that gave me a bit of an idea of how the two of them work in a painting. I'm quite familiar with titanium white, so it was kind of old hat using the titanium white. I kind of knew what to expect, and I was able to, do my painting and add tints and pastel versions of all of the different colors without any major issue. And then when I went to the zinc white, you can see because, and this is no surprise, because the zinc white is so transparent, you can even still see some of my pencil marks. You don't have that same ability, which when you're using titanium white, you don't have the same ability to block out what is below. So that's just something to keep in mind if you want to try out zinc white. It also, and this is interesting, it also allows you to do some layers where you allow the layer below it to really be part of it. You're able to optically mix some colors. So I put some purple down and then I put some of the magenta down over top of that, and it gives a bit more of a purpley color. And you can do that throughout. It's a bit, if you've done some watercolor painting, it's a bit like that, which again, not unexpected because it is quite transparent and watercolors are quite transparent. So it was an interesting exercise, but what it did teach me is that I will probably continue using titanium white as my primary white on my palette because I'm quite familiar with it. I'm able to cover over previous layers, but as I become more familiar with using transparent colors in my paintings, where I want to do like a glaze over top, a glaze of kind of a pale pastel color, I will use zinc white instead because that will allow some of the previous colors to come through. So I think this was an interesting lesson for me. I hope you learned a little bit from it as well. Titanium white still going to be my main color, but zinc white, I will occasionally use it when I want to do some glazing.